The reason, you know what I want to use this for? It's when we go to the psychic fairs and stuff.
Tape some of the conversations.
Yeah, get some of the blips, from the...
Bill Jack used to do that at the People's Fair. He'd take a camera just down and, when you get these bizarre answers, he wanted them on.
I just thought sometimes
Great for the kids.
You go teach a class and people look at you like you're weird.
It's right. All right, let's start. Let's pray. It doesn't take much to offend some people, does it? Let's try it again to pray. Father, thanks for love and mercy and grace and all the incredibly good things you give us. Lord, as we look at an incredibly different way of looking at the world, at one of the true demonic influences in this world, Father, we pray for wisdom and for compassion and a love for lost sheep. Father, give us a heart for these people that we talk about today. In Jesus' name, amen. For those who don't know, my name is Bill Honsberger with Haven Ministries in Denver, which is a mission organization dedicated to reaching people in non-Christian religions. So we talk to all sorts of different kinds of people, everything from Muslims to Mormons to Buddhists. And our subject for today is Advaita Vedanta, which is the predominant Hindu belief that has come over here. It's not the only Hindu belief. It is the predominant school of Hinduism that has reached the American shores in the last 100 years. It is the teaching of the majority of gurus that have come over here to the West in Hinduism's rather recent missionary movement in the last 100 years. It is the philosophy of the educated, of the intellectual, of the university mindset in India itself. My own professor in Hinduism told me straight to my face that she has her PhD in Shiva thought. She hated Advaita Vedanta. And what she was really expressing is that this is the stuff of the upper class. This is not the stuff of the lower class peoples. This is the intellectual side of things. And so the lower caste peoples don't really have this kind of thinking. In India, you have roughly 330 million different gods and counting. And so the kind of village Hinduism that's now starting to move over here in the last 20 years with a lot more immigration, that you might see the old-fashioned classic bow down to Ganesha, the elephant-headed god, or to Shiva or Kali, or a lot of the different individual gods. That kind of approach is coming over here more now. But what has been here for quite a while, really since, I guess in its heyday, since, what's his name, came over in 1893 in the Parliament of World Religions. I just lost his name. Vivekananda, excuse me. Since Vivekananda came over here in 1893, there has been hundreds of Hindu temples built. Lots of gurus started coming over in the 60s and 70s. And what they taught was Advaita Vedanta, not the stuff for the lay people, but the stuff of the educated classes. So this is the kind of Hinduism that most people would recognize. If you're familiar at all with New Age thought, you'll clearly see the distinctions and the definitions that look very similar in some ways. It's the kind of stuff that Ram Dass brought back with him when he comes back from India in the 60s and all this kind of stuff. So what we want to go through today is the history of this, where it came from. And rather than reading my very dry paper, if you'd like the paper, leave me your information and I'll send you a copy of it. It's about 25 pages long, and I don't want to bore you, but it's an academic paper. It's written with all the right sources and stuff. So if you want good constructive information, or you can just download it off my website. It's on havenministries.com. So havenministry.com. Let me go into what this actually is and give you the background for it. Roughly 1200 to 1500 BC in India, a group of people that are historically known as the Aryans, and nobody knows where they came from, and everybody's divided on who they were. Are they Persians? Are they the Germans? Are they Russians? Are they Greeks? Nobody's really sure, but one thing we do know is that between the Indian and the Greek language, there are a lot of parallels between ancient Sanskrit and Greek. For example, the A in front of a word in both Greek and Sanskrit is a negator. So like we say atheism or amoral in Greek means no God or no morals. Advaita means no knowledge, or non-dual, no duality. Dvaita is duality. So Advaita is no dualities. And so we have this connection. Vedanta comes from the word for knowledge. Again, if you just see if you know Greek, one of the more prevalent words in Greek for knowledge is oidos. And this just a switch here to Vedas. Or you could say the Greek word for God is Deus. The Sanskrit word is Devas. It's very, very close in a lot of ways. So Vedanta means knowledge, and in an instance, Veda means knowledge in a simple way. Vedanta means the end, or the completion, or the fulfillment. Everything you need to know is known now. That's kind of the mindset behind Vedanta. So non-dualistic knowledge is the idea of what Advaita Vedanta means. It means we've come to the conclusion of the universe, we understand everything that's going on, and we understand it's not dual. So if it's not dual, it's singular. So the affirmative way of saying this is it's monistic. There's only one. And whether you watch The Matrix or a zillion different varieties of this, you get the image of what that looks like. Virtually all forms of Buddhism, and even at the end of the day, most of the personalized forms of Hinduism come back to the idea that there's really only one. If you read more intelligent New Agers like Ken Wilber, A Brief History of Everything, or several of the things he's written, at the end of the day, it's all one. You're just stuck in, again, what the Sanskrit says is avidya. Again, there's the negator. Nidja is knowledge, so you're stuck in ignorance. You have no knowledge of the universe. That's why you don't see the oneness. You're stuck in Dvaita, or dualism. Now, what we're going to look at is where Advaita comes from, mainly out of as we understand the Bhagavad Gita and its own background. Then look at the different versions of this that will come out. And once you see, particularly as we look at two thinkers, Shankara and Ramanuja, once you see the difference between these guys, you start seeing different schools within the New Age camps. You start saying, oh, okay, these guys are more like him. So even though most New Agers I talked to couldn't tell you these guys' names if their life depended on it, they were just reflecting their ideas hundreds and hundreds of years later. So let's go back into the history of a little bit of India itself and where this book comes from. The Bhagavad Gita means the Song of the Lord. It is the most popular book in India. It plays the role in India that the Bible used to play in American culture. If you have money, you have a copy of the Gita. If your village is poor and there's only one copy of the Gita available, then it is passed around and treasured. If there's a movie or a cartoon show showing the stories of the Gita, everybody will stop work. They'll just shut down because the Gita is being displayed. It has two prominent stories in it. One is the Ramayana, which is a long story. It's very popular in Indian culture. In some ways, it's like their version of Romeo and Juliet. It's Rama and his wife Sita and this big dramatic thing that they go through. It's not really the critical one I'm going to look at today, but the Ramayana is still unpopular. If you want to know what the picture of what the perfect man and woman should be as husband and wife and all that kind of thing, that's the Ramayana. That's the role it plays for their culture. So depending if you go to North India or South India, you get a different version of the Gita, different endings to that story. But that's not the real story I want to address. The main story, especially as it's come over here, is called Arjuna's Dilemma. And Arjuna is a warrior. And he's in the warrior caste, the Kshatriya caste, the second highest caste of India. And his job is to kill people or break things if he's called upon it to do so. That's his role in life. It is based on karma. And it's his dharma, or the larger picture of the universe, the truer thing of the universe, to fulfill his karmic role. You might hear dharma in different contexts, but that's kind of the old Hindu understanding. Now, where does this all come from? Again, India is invaded, although in the last 20 years, some scholars are now saying that the people in the Indus Valley, the people in the subcontinent of India, invited these people to come in and dominate them. That's one of the silliest ideas I've ever heard in my life. The culture said, yes, come in and supplant all our gods and take over us and rule us forever. Well, the one thing we know about this group that invaded was that they were lighter skinned than the people that they found. And the caste system is based on skin color. In fact, they actually have some old stories in some of the older texts, what's called the Purunas, of the god that fell asleep and was dismembered. And the head and the chest and the lower part of the body and the legs represent the four major castes. But if you ask how the caste is determined, it's completely based on skin color. The lighter skinned, and don't take this, if you're Swedish or Finnish, it doesn't make much sense to you. The lighter skinned Indians are in fact the upper caste. When they find a new tribe, and this happens on occasion, where they'll find a tribe that nobody's ever seen, and they're not properly seen in their role in the caste yet, the Brahmin priests, which are the upper caste, their job is to ascertain where these people are in the chain, and they will determine that based on their skin color, on how light or dark they are. But as the caste is set up, there's four major castes, and hundreds of little distinctions or steps up the ladder for each. The top is the Brahmin, the priestly caste. Second is the Kshatriya. Third is kind of the merchant caste, the Vaishyavites. I'm spelling that one wrong. And the fourth one has different names: Shudras, Dalits, or as they're often called, the untouchables in India today, the worst of it. The system is building where the lighter skin castes are always on top. So in essence, the Aryans, whoever they were, set up a system for 3,000 years now that has kept the lighter skinned people on top of the totem pole in India. And it's, even though historically in Buddhism is one attempt to get out of the caste, and Gandhi was a more recent attempt to get out of the caste, which we're going to pay some attention to at the end of this. Historically, these things have been seen as un-Hindu. Buddhism ruled India for 300, 400 years, and then it was basically cast out as un-Hindu. Gandhi was killed by Hindu nationalists because his approach was un-Hindu, because he was attacking the caste. You're supposed to appreciate, as a lower caste Hindu, your place on the ladder here, because you'd come up the ladder from rock to insect to fish to, whatever. And if you suffer well at each level of the game, the goal is you'll be up high. So not to complain down here, because someday you'll be the Brahmin, someday you'll be the upper caste, but you have to do well down here. Anyways, as the early scriptures, the oldest scriptures in India, the Rig Veda, it's usually written RG, about 1,000 years BC, and it's mainly full of poems, prayers. The prayers would be things like, give me more money and more sons and more horses. Very materialistic. Virtually nothing about reincarnation. All the kind of stuff that most of us associate with Hinduism is not present in the Rig Veda. It's about 1,000 years before Christ. Over the course of the next 100 years, though, things start to change. And by the time of the Buddha, which is the 6th century, 500s BC, this is called by scholars the age of the renouncers. And the idea being, and Buddhism and the Jains are probably the two best known of the renouncing groups, is that we reject this notion that what Hinduism has been about, getting better stuff in this world, because this world has come to be seen as the enemy. And if the world is the enemy, then I don't want more of what is bad for me. So then rather getting more stuff, the goal is to get out of this stuff, get away, become detached. And Buddhism certainly takes that to the nth degree. But it also changes the face of India itself. India becomes very driven by this mindset. And again, for about maybe 300 or 400 years, scholars argue, India becomes Buddhism. This is all important because Shankara is accused of being a Buddhist by some of his critics. Well, anyways, this goes on until roughly the time of Christ. Now, this is an interesting side note. I've run by some Hindu scholars and some Hindu critics who hate Christianity. But about the time of Christ, roughly, they don't know when, is when the Bhagavad Gita shows up. Nobody knows who wrote it. Nobody knows when it was written, but it's roughly the time of Christ. And what it does is help give rebirth to personal gods. Old school Buddhism, Theravada Buddhism, the oldest version that runs India from the 5th century till the 1st, is notoriously atheistic. Just there's no God, there's nothing out there. We'll look at that in a second, what that looks like. And so there's this attack on idolatry. Idolatry becomes seen as useless. Idolatry becomes seen as an attachment to different things in the world. The classic Hindus had, behind the illusion of the world, there's the one. And what is the one? It's God. It's Brahman. Or Krishna or Vishnu, whoever your favorite one was. The Buddha said, no, behind the illusion is nothing. And I'm doing the Buddhism one later on, but that's kind of the idea. When the Gita is written, all of a sudden in the 1st century, you have a rebirth of interest in personal gods, and idolatry just goes off. All of a sudden, the classic gods, Shiva and Kali and Krishna and Vishnu and all these characters, there's just rebirth. Temples are being built everywhere. People are getting into personal devotion, which the Hindu calls bhakti. Just everywhere. Just tremendous. And I asked some of my Hindu interlocutors, and I said, do you suppose there's a reason for this that might include the fact that Christianity hits the shores of India within the 1st century? That Thomas, if you listen to the Indian church, Thomas shows up there inside the 1st century and starts talking about a personal God, a God who actually cares about you, a God who loves you, traditional Christian thought. In a context where there is no God, where there's only this nothingness, this shunyata, the void of Buddhism, that itself might have been a spark. And the reason you say this is because if you get into religious history, you see all sorts of different religions, everything from the Sikhs to the Muslims to Pure Land Buddhists and other things like this, where you can obviously see a conscious attempt to put things together. Syncretism that was developed and planned. Guru Nanak, who founded the Sikhs, deliberately tried to put Hinduism and Buddhism together. I mean, he states that as his goal. Muhammad definitively takes different streams of thought and throws them in together, or whatever that's worth. But you see that kind of thing where there's conscious efforts to put, and so I asked them, and my Hindu guys said, I have no problem with that. I can see that happening perfectly. That it perhaps is the introduction of Christianity that starts this rebirth in personal gods. Well, anyways, it happens in the first century, and the Gita becomes everybody's favorite storybook. And so, if you read the story itself, and Arjuna's dilemma is the one that's pictured on virtually every American edition you get of this. And what you see here is a warrior. And the warrior, a Brahmin caste, Kshatriya caste, is being driven by Krishna. At the beginning of the story, Krishna is just a lowly slave. He's the chariot driver. By the end of the story, Krishna is the Lord of the universe, who is here to explain the true picture of the universe and solve Arjuna's deliverer. So you often see the picture on the covers that are very popular like this. The iconographics are very, very important to Hindus. Lord Krishna, the Smurf god, is driving here. But the real picture of what's going on is found in most texts. There's some very famous paintings. You can't really see this one too well, but there's a large battle scene. And there's a lot of history of this. I'm not going to bore you with it. But two great armies are about to fight. And again, there's a reason why they're about to do this. But nevertheless, Arjuna is in the middle in his chariot with Krishna, wondering what I should do. He's here. It's his duty. Oh, I should mention where karma came from. Prior to the Buddha, karma was the actions of a priest. The Brahmin priest would be called, and remember the average prayer in the Rig Veda is, give me a son, for example. So if you wanted to have a son, which in Indian culture would be valuable, then you call in the priest. Your family had money. You would hire a priest who would come in and do a ritual, usually around the fire. Agni was the ancient fire god, very popular. And so the priest would do rituals. He would do sacred sounds, which are called mantras, sacred words that would be repeated. He would do sacred ancient gang signs, as it were, hand signals, the mudras, and he would do this around the fire. If the ceremony worked, and, oh, by the way, you got a son, then this was a good priest. We keep him on retainer, we'll pay him money, this kind of stuff. If, of course, there was a girl or no conception, then it's a bad priest, he did the rituals wrong. But the ritual action of the priest was what karma was. By the time of the Buddha, though, karma had been extended beyond that. It was all action. Now, again, Americans are very loose with the idea of good karma, bad karma, positive karma, negative. No real serious guru would talk this way. The teachers of India said karma is all action. So me raising my hand this way is karmic. Mark scratching his face is karmic. Everything that you do is karma. So it's action based on previous actions. Arjuna's dilemma is that he is called as a warrior caste. His karmic duty has placed him in this role as a warrior. He's gone up the ladder rather significantly to the second highest level, and yet he looks over at the other army. What does he see? He sees first his friends, and that concerns him, and then he sees some of his own family members, and that really distresses him, and then worst of all, he sees his guru, his teacher, and he realizes, if I do my job, if I do what my duty is, I fulfill my karmic role in the universe, my dharma, then I'm going to be hurting people I care about. So there's a personal level of hurt for him that he's worried about. And then more telling in some ways is that he's afraid of getting negative fruit or negative karma, even though there's not supposed to be any. He's afraid of getting negative karma for, in fact, killing people that he cares about. What do I do? What do I do? So I'm stuck in the middle of this battlefield life. I don't know what to do. And this is where Krishna reveals himself as the Lord of the universe, as the one that's helped him out of it. Now, if you are familiar with the story, then you'll know what I'm about to tell you. Or if you watch The Lion King several hundred times with your kids or grandchildren, you already know the story. That's a very simple way of... Lion King is the best movie I can think of to show to a 5-year-old the problem of Arjuna's dilemma and your way out of it. And after I give you the story, maybe you'll see the connection. So what does Krishna tell him to do? Well, the Gita offers 3 different paths or ways out of the dilemma. The first one is not good. Well, you can just renounce your role, be a coward, run from the field, everybody will hate you, and you'll come back as a frog in the next life. You'll go way down the ladder. My paraphrase, but that's in essence what he's saying. And that's the one he's afraid of anyways. If I do these things, I'm going to come back way down the ladder. I don't want that. The third path is the path of the Hare Krishna, or other groups like that. Hare Krishnas are not Advaitas. They're Dvaita. They're dualist. And typically, you take your own personal God and you have a connection with him. Hare Krishnas in our country are basically followers of Vishnu. But for the Advaitas, there is no personal God out there to worry about. It's all one. It's all God. So what do I do? So the path of devotion, which a Hindu calls bhakti. A bhakti is someone who's devoted to an idol. So I'll go bathe the idol, feed the idol, meditate in front of the idol, lay it down for its nap, wake it up, do the exact same thing over and over and over again, chant the idol's name, devote myself completely to the idol, and that will alleviate my karmic duty. And so I never have to think again. There's no more moral dilemmas. I just serve the idol. Krishna will grab me by my ponytail and drag me up into Vishnu's heaven or something like this. That's the third path, which is taken by a minority of group. But the big path is the middle one, the second path. And this is the one that Krishna spends most of his time articulating. I'm not going to read you all the passages, but the basic idea is he gives you this whole picture of Advaita Vedanta. Here is the world as you perceive it. It's the world of sense perception. In this world, I see an army. I see myself. I see my friends. I see all the things that I perceive as normal and real. I've lived my life, blah, 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 blah. This world is the world of Maya. Very popular to see in India, a blue god lying down. This is Brahman. And out of his belly button comes a lotus plant. And the lotus is Maya, the dream, the illusion. Again, if you saw The Matrix, it's just an old computer analogy for a very, very old idea. The world of perception is not the real world. It's, in fact, it blinds you from the real world. Your mind is constantly constructing Maya, which is, if you're familiar with Plato's cave and many other, there's been different versions of this idea that somehow we're not actually experiencing the real world, and you can find it all the way up into Kant in the idealist tradition and philosophy, that somehow the world of perception is not the real world. We don't actually experience. We only perceive that we do. And therein is the problem. Our mind is filling us up with these perceptions. Perceptions blind us to the true reality. So somehow we have to get out of Maya. So how does this great teaching get taught? This is the wheel for the Hindu, or what's called samsara, or the circle of life. But what it means is the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. And Hindu gurus had you coming back on this thing 800 million times. So the world becomes punishment. The world is a prison. The world is not a place you want to come on to. And anybody who comes along and promises you a fast track off the wheel, like the Buddha, for example. One of the things that made Buddhism sell so well in the 5th century is that I've got a fast track out of this. I've got a quick way for what the Hindu would call moksha, or liberation. You don't have to come back 800 million times. In fact, I had this experience, and I'm not coming back anymore. That's exactly what the Buddha said. That sells well in a culture that believes it's trapped here millions and millions of times. So what's happened is that Arjuna thinks that this is going on. He's going to suffer. He's going to come back again and again, but even in a worse state than he is right now. So what is Arjuna's, how is the dilemma solved? Well, this is what Lord Krishna tells him. We have studied out the issue. And those of us who have studied the issue have come to the wonderful truth that nothing ever dies and no one ever kills. And in their classic illustration, the Atman, which I'll explain in a minute, Atman, it's, for the moment, let me just call it equivalent to the soul. It's not really, but it's sort of like the soul. Or sometimes you'll see jiva, that's the Jain word, but sometimes Hindus use it as well. Your Atman or your jiva has a set of clothes, physical form. Okay? And at a certain point, the Atman just lays the clothes down and picks up another set of clothes. So that's our understanding of what's going on samsara. You're born, your Atman takes on an appearance, a physical body. At some point, it just abandons it. You appear to die, but not really dying, because the Atman is what's permanent. And then you pick up a new set of clothes. Now, let me read you just a little bit of this. Let them say it in their own words. Okay, here's Krishna talking to, or the story's narrating. O descendant of Bharata, that's Arjuna, at the time, Krishna, smiling, in the midst of both the armies, spoke the following words to the grief-stricken Arjuna. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, while speaking learned words, you are mourning for what is not worthy of grief. Those who are wise lament neither for the living nor for the dead. Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. As the embodied souls continue, that's Atman, as the embodied Atman continually passes into this body from boyhood to youth and old age, the soul, or Atman, similarly passes into another body at death. A sober person is not bewildered. Remember, the issue is it's a moral dilemma. He's upset. He's grief-ridden. What if I do this terrible thing? So Krishna is trying to calm him down. Chill out, buddy. Okay? There's no cause to lament. O son of Kunti, the non-permanent, notice the language, the non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress, and their disappearance in due course are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. They arise from sense perception, O scion of Bharata, and one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. O best among men, Arjuna, the person who's not disturbed by happiness and distress and is steady in both is certainly eligible for moksha, liberation. Those who are the seers of the truth have concluded that of the non-existent or material body, there is no endurance, and of the eternal, Atman, there is no change. This they have concluded by studying the nature of both. That which pervades the entire body, that's what's inside your body, you should know to be indestructible. No one is able to destroy that imperishable Atman. The material body of the indestructible, immeasurable, and eternal living entity is sure to come to an end. Therefore, fight, O descendant of Bharata. It goes on. There's one of the more, what I consider one of the more, neither he who thinks the living entity the slayer, so no one who thinks about the killer, nor he who thinks it is slain, the victim, is in knowledge, vidya. For the self slays not, nor is slain. So there's one line, and you go in here further and further, and there's a lot more detail to all this, but you go in this further and further, and you get to the point where it says, so slay with glee, O Bharata, whistle while you work, kill with joy, because nothing dies. That which is perishable, the body, wasn't real in the first place. That which is imperishable, the Atman, or sort of the soul. And when the Hindu teachers came over here and started teaching this, they said the word soul, because it sounded good to a Christian ears. We knew what a soul was. But they don't really mean the soul. Anyways, the soul is indestructible. Therefore, you don't have to worry about what happened. And since you don't have to get upset about whether somebody's killed or not, then just everything else that correspondingly less than that. No one ever gets raped. No one ever gets lied to. No one ever gets stolen from. There is nothing that happens in the world because it's all the world of Maya, the world of perception, which is a false world, which must be gotten around. So this is the basic teaching of the Gita. And again, from this, you're going to see different strains come out. The Krishna, the personalist, the Advaita type strains that you see in village India. And that's now coming over here. You have a lot more Hindus over here in the last 20 years than we've had before. And so, like in Denver, we have a Hindu temple, and you'll see the gods pictured there. And one of the things that's interesting, just one of my professors made a big stink out of this, is that you have what's called darshan. And this is why Hindu gods, especially as compared to Buddhists, Hindu gods have big eyes. And the reason is because the Atman is inside the statue. The Atman of Krishna, Shiva, Kali, whoever, is actually in the statue. So when I come into the temple to worship, I lay down my offering and I want to make sure I make eye contact. This is why the eyes are so big. It's iconographic in art here. It's very important to them. That's why the Buddha's eyes are closed. That's also a theological statement. All right? But I make eye contact with the God. He sees me or she sees me and I see him or her. And that's part of the worship, is that somehow they know now that I've been here to give them bhakti, to give them devotion. And so I get extra brownie points and come up the ladder a little bit better next time. That's kind of the mindset. That's village India. That's all over the place. So when I have somebody tell me, oh, I'm a Hindu, well, that doesn't mean a whole lot. There's zillions of Hindu gods, and our teacher showed us a slide of a god she had seen of a white goddess statue in some village, completely blanched white, with pink reddish splotches all over it. Anybody want to guess what the god was? You don't cheat, don't you know?
Wasn't chickenpox?
No, but you're close. It's worse. Smallpox.
Small.
They're literally worshiping the virus as divine. Now, in the concept that everything is one, then the virus is not distinct. This is why the bubonic plague breaks out in India every few years, because the rat god is in fact just as divine, and I can't kill even though I catch the disease, I can't kill the rats that are killing my children because it's all one. It's all part of the same thing. Okay, so anyways, along this system comes out and personal gods take off everywhere for about 600 years. This stuff just dominates. And so Christianity is there, but it's a minor player because to the Hindu mindset, a Christian is just a devotee to Christ. What makes that any better than a devotee to Krishna, Shiva, Vishnu, the rest? It's all seen as the same to them. You serve your God, and especially as you think, especially by the 5th century, 6th century, Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy have just as many icons as any Hindu ever could have. To the Hindu mindset, it would make perfect sense. You're bowing down in front of your statue, I bow in front of my statue. What's the difference? It's all one. It's all the exact same thing. Behind the reality of the statue, it's all the same thing. It's all one. Even to give credit to the Catholics and Eastern Orthodox, that's not what they're trying to say, but nevertheless, to the passive observer, it looks the same. So in the middle of all this, out develops this school of thought called Advaita. And Shankara, probably the best known Hindu philosopher / theologian, whatever you want to call him, comes up in the 7th century. And he's only alive for 32 years. But he writes a ton of stuff. And in this whole system, Shankara is going to give probably the classic definition for what is considered the 3 main paths of marga, or ways off the wheel. The first one is the bhakti. So serve the idol, feed the idol, bathe the idol. The second one is the yogic path. I always crack up when I hear the public school. So yoga has nothing to do with Hinduism. You know nothing to say this. Nobody that reads Hinduism can say something like that. Yoga is one of the oldest accepted major paths of Hinduism. And the third is the one of vidya, or knowledge. Well, what does this look like? Well, remember I mentioned Atman, and it said it's not quite the soul. Well, the Atman is a permanent thing. Buddhism denies the Atman. There is no permanent thing. One of the radical departures that Buddha has. But all good Hindus, especially good thinkers like Shankara, are going to affirm that there is something permanent. As I just read out of the Gita, it's really plain. There's something that passes from existence to existence. The Atman picks up a new body, just like changing clothes, and it's existing forever. So we scholars have discovered this. There is an Atman, the Atman lives forever. However, like the Greeks had the problems with the one and the many, so did the Hindu mind. Well, in what context then do we understand Brahman, the one of all? Most Hindu thinkers will call the oneness, the consciousness of the universe, whatever, Brahman. Every once in a while you run somebody who says, no, it's Vishnu, or just because of the inner discussion the Hindus have. But most say it's Brahman, which is related to the Brahmin caste being the upper caste. But Brahman is the god of everything. And so what has happened is that we're trying to understand the relationship to these two. We're stuck in the illusion. We think this is the real world. We're stuck in the world of perception. I see gazillions of things out there, but my teacher tells me that it's all one. Well, how do I get past that? Well, historically, and certainly in Shankara's system, you can't get past there using your mind. Your mind is the enemy. And you can't pick up Hindu text or Buddhist text without seeing this over and over again. Your mind is the problem. Why? Because that's where Maya comes from. Maya is being perpetuated by your mind. Having a new experience, I think I'm seeing a blue wall. I think I'm holding a pen. I think I'm talking to you. All of these things are part of Maya. And so every day of our lives, we're just filled with all this stuff. More and more Maya comes up. I read the paper, I get distressed. I look at the internet. My wife and I are having a problem. My kid runs off. Maya is just creating all this distress in my life. So this is not just a theoretical problem, it's a how do I live problem, which is expressed in the Gita. How do I react to what I see in the world? So in the midst of this whole thing, I'm trying to understand the relationship between these two. Everything is Atman. The book is Atman, the table, the paper, the pen, you and I. It's all has Atman in it. The divine pervades all things. But the simple, uneducated mind sees nothing but the difference. I see a difference between the chair and the table, me and the pen, my car and a cow, on and on. My mind is always making distinctions. Therefore, Shankara says there's only one good thing your mind is for, and that is to teach you that your mind cannot help you reach enlightenment. And if you see Buddhism, particularly by the time it gets to Zen, is the most deliberate attack on the mind. It's irrational at its best because you cannot use the mind to get you out of the problem the mind created. So we have to avoid the mind. And that's, again, you can do it through yoga, you can do it through devotion to the idol, but everybody agrees the mind is the problem. For Shankara, it's the meditative experience. So by the time we see gurus come over here like Maharishi, Mahesh Yogi, or Maharaji, or a zillion different guys that show up, what do we hear? You must meditate. You must get past the mind. The mind is the hang-up. So irrationality is prized. In India to this day, you have groups of ascetics, and the most prized of all are the most extreme of all, because even in Hindu context, they're extremely irrational. So we have people, for example, that will live in crematoriums, smear ashes all over themselves. They are the most godly, the most divine beings of all, because they are showing us by their life that they reject all things in the world. They know the world is an illusion, and they're going to do the most outrageous things they can. Or you have people that smear cow dung all over themselves and in their hair and everything and walk through India naked. They're holier than anybody's ever seen before because, again, even normal Hindus don't do stuff like this. Duh. And so they're showing, again, how much they reject the non-reality of this world. It's not real, and we're going to show it by living it out in such a way. By the time you get into certain forms of Buddhism, which have become very popular here in the United States, tantric sex, which is very perverse sexual acts, again, are seen as more holy than anything else because you're rejecting normal worldly norms about sex. And by rejecting the norms of the culture, therefore the world, then you're showing your objection to the world itself. Okay, so the Hindu is worried about the issue. What Shankara says you experience through meditation, once you get past the mind, is that you realize that Atman and Brahman are not two separate things. And the big key to the whole thing is realizing that Atman is Brahman. There is no difference. Now, old illustrators of this, that you might hear from Oprah Winfrey, it's actually thousands of years old, is that Brahman is like the ocean, and each of us are a drop from the ocean. And what happened in the just to play the analogy out, in the hydration cycle, somewhere the drop gets separated from the ocean, goes through the cycle, eventually gets rained down the line, and somewhere in that process the drop forgot what it was. The drop started to think of itself as a separate thing, as an I, as a self. And it got a consciousness of itself in the world of perception. And so it starts interacting with the world of perception. Big, bad mistake. That's the prison. The goal then, of course, is for the drop to rejoin as it goes down to the creek and into a river and eventually comes back into the ocean where it ceases to be. That's release. No more suffering, no more prison. I'm one with the universe. But depending on how consistent you take this, and you see this in both in Hindu and Buddhist thought, I never was one in the first place. I just thought I was one. Thought is the problem. The mind is the enemy. So for Shankara, avidya is not just a simple mental formula. It's a realization of consciousness, of something you experience through my meditative experience. I become one with the universe, and I realize I never was a one to begin with. I was never really a separate Atman. So what happens for Shankara then in the system is that this whole thing about Atman has to disappear. So maybe the best way to illustrate this is Shankara sees the universe as a seamless cloak. There are not billions of things. There never was. Maya tricked you into thinking that any of this exists. It never does exist. There's some very famous stories. Ravi Zacharias tells a wonderful story about Shankara as a Brahmin priest. He's hired out by some, not a Brahmin priest, as a Brahmin priest. He's hired by a nobleman, a Kshatriya king, to come and teach his family, teaches the truths of the universe. So he comes and he's giving this whole story to the king about how the world's an illusion, blah, 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 blah. So the king decides to test him out and has his men let loose a tiger. Well, in India, a tiger's a serious thing. So there's a tiger loose in the garden. Shankara hears the tiger and he runs up a tree. And by the way, if you know anything about tigers, that's no help. But nonetheless, he thinks he's fine. And the king starts laughing his head off at him. He says, oh, great, wise one, help me understand. You just said the world's an illusion, yet when you heard the tiger, you ran up the tree. Shankara, being quick, goes, that was an imaginary me running up an imaginary tree from the imaginary tiger. Didn't actually exist. All right. There's another illustration that Shankara himself used about the snake. When you're walking down the road and you see what looks like a cobra in front of you, the first thing that happens is fear and dread, and you're terrified of the snake. And so your entire life is shaped by your experience of what you perceive. But as you get closer, like you're going to do that if you're afraid, when you get closer and you see the snake in reality, it wasn't a snake, it was just a stick. And so that's his way of understanding the universe. When you understand it's a stick, you calm down. You're not upset anymore, you're okay with everything. You can go on your walk. In the same way, what you perceive in the world to be evil and bad and murderous and all these terrible things, when you closely examine it, and that's his message of the Gita, when the gurus and teachers have examined everything, we realize there's no snake out there. It doesn't actually exist. Now, just to put this in modern parlance, about a week after the shooting in Bailey, the school shooting we had in September, and the day after the school shooting in the Amish school in Pennsylvania, I was talking to a New Age guy at a restaurant in Denver named Flint. And I'd met him at a meeting we held, and he came to have lunch with us. And Flint flat out looked at me in the face. Nobody died there. Well, welcome to the 2,000 year-old world of the Gita. Flint was, and my friend that brought him, that worked with him said, and I said, it's probably good you didn't do this, but my friend brought him and says, I wanted to stand up in the restaurant and just yell out, did everybody hear what this idiot said? And I said, well, it's probably good you didn't actually say that. We're trying to reach out to this guy, but he was trying to at least be consistent. Nobody ever dies. We experience suffering in this world because we think we die, we think those we care about die. That's the heart of the message. Now, those of you that saw The Lion King, anybody remember? The version of Arjuna's dilemma. Did you guys see the movie? Come on. You never grandkids? I'm shocked. Again, it's a Hindu track for 5-year-olds. It really is. There's a scene where the father lion is explaining to his son what it means to be the king. And he takes him up on a cliff and he says, everything that you see, everything that the sun touches is your kingdom. And all this stuff's happening, it's sunrise, and he looks over and there's a dark area. He says, well, the kid goes, well, what about the dark area? He says, well, that's not our kingdom. You can't do anything over there. And the boy goes, well, I thought a king could do anything he wanted to. And father says, no, you need to understand. A king's job is to take responsibility and take care of everything in his kingdom. And so we must take care of each of the creatures. And as he's saying, these different groups of animals run by in the cartoon. And right as he says, it's our job to take care of all the animals, a bunch of antelopes come loping by. And the kid goes, but Dad, don't we eat the antelope? Moral dilemma. Our responsibility as the king is to take care of the creation, and yet here we are eating part of the creation. Dad? Logical question. It's just the exact same question that in a different form. So how does the dad answer? Anybody remember? Right, but how does he explain it? When we die, we become the grass. Think of the circle. We die, we become the grass, and the antelope eat us, and therefore the circle of life is complete. That's his direct answer. So it's not really a bad thing because they're just going to invert it. He doesn't go into all the detail behind it. He explains at a kid's level that it's not immoral for us to eat these things because it just turns around. Karma. They eat us someday. It all works out. All right. So like I said, he hadn't gotten into the more detailed version of it. But so for Shankara, the world's a seamless cloak. There's only one. So this is not just the world, it's the universe, it's everything. It's Brahman, and that's all there is. Now, 7th century India, there's gazillions of Hindu temples to all sorts of gods. Here comes probably their quickest mind, their greatest thinker, and he says, guess what, guys? Everything you're doing, all your bhakti devotion, is a waste of time. You get no brownie points in the bigger picture of the universe for playing games with rocks and statues and pieces of wood. They don't actually exist. It's all the same. Nothing actually exists except for the one. That's Advaita. There's only one. So this is devastating in a culture. It's kind of like when Paul rolls in and acts into Ephesus. Great as Artemis, you're ruining our business. He just has this wide swath across India where the intellectuals are saying, hey, I don't need to give money to some statue. I don't need to go down and kiss up to the priest. I don't need to go down and worry about making eye contact with the idols. All of that's illusion. I just need to understand through my meditative experience that Atman is Brahman. When the Hindu bows, and you see this all over Boulder and probably Santa Fe, Namaste. They have a way of saying this. It's Tavis Tavam Asi, which is translated in English, that art thou. So what I'm saying is, I recognize not only the divine in you, Namaste, Tavis Tavam Asi, not only the divine in you, but that the divine is in fact all. It's not just a little bit. Atman is not just a bit of Atman. Atman is Brahman. So through that knowledge, I'm also transported, I get liberation, I'm off the wheel. So again, for about 400 or 500 years, this just devastates the idol culture, and as it starts spreading, it just has this corrosive effect. Even though there's another interesting story about how Shankar himself used to go to Vishnu temples and lay offerings. Little inconsistencies. Nasty little facts. Well, along comes a different thinker. And like I said, when you start seeing the New Age, you start seeing one or the other. And this is Ramanuja. And Ramanuja is, in essence, coming along to rescue idol worship. He's got to make sense out of it. And he's going to go back to the exact same source, in the exact same tradition as Krishna. He's going to point to the Gita itself, only he's going to read it differently. So you might think in modern or postmodern terms, basically, Shankara is perceived as the postmodernist who makes the text sing and dance the way he wants to. Ramanuja is going to come back to the actual text and say, wait a second. According to the text of the Gita, you're missing some important things here, Shankara. He still believes in Advaita. He still believes at the end of the day, we're going to come to understand it's all one. There's no distinctions. But he has a weaker sense of Maya and therefore a stronger sense of Atman. Shankara just wipes out Atman. Okay? It's there, but it's just an instantiation of the one. Get over it. For Ramanuja, he's going to say, wait a second. I don't know what, at the end of the day, sure, it's all going to be one. But for right now, there has to be some point in idol worship. Why? Because we see Arjuna worshiping Krishna at the end of the story. And we have several other instances in the Gita and in other ancient texts that are important to the Advaita tradition of idol worship. So to be literal to the text, we must celebrate the idea that there's somehow some version of Atman that's worthy of worship. So maybe the best language now is that you've got all these little cells of Atman. Again, in New Age parlance, you might hear people talking about the universe being the body of God. That type of stuff. Each of us is a little bit of a cell of the body of God, kind of a common New Agey theme. That's really echoes of Ramanuja. So what happens with Ramanuja, since each little bit has got some sort of reality, kind of squishy, we're not really sure how it works, Ramanuja wasn't either. Since each little bit has some version of reality, then it has value to be worshipped. So bhakti now means something again. Yay, Ramanuja. To this day. So for the last 800-900 years, the personal God industry just takes off again. What happens in discussion between these two, Ramanuja is going to say, Shankara is the man, it's all one. But for now, in some ways, you get value from this. So once he holds on to the scholarly tradition, but he gives room to breathe, as it were, for the lay people. So this is why he's really popular in certain circles as an understander of Vedanta. Now here's one of the fun things about my paper that you should get into is that if you read the stuff on the Gita, for example, this is one of my favorite. Here it is. Here's Gandhi's quote, his way of looking at the Gita. When doubt haunts me, when disappointments stare me in the face, and I see not one ray of hope on the horizon, I turn to the Bhagavad Gita, and I find a verse to comfort me, and I immediately begin to smile in the midst of overwhelming sorrow. Those who meditate on the Gita will derive fresh joy and new meaning from it every day. Now, Gandhi, in many other quotes, says that the Gita is more important than the Bible. It's the best book that's ever been written. It drove his entire outlook towards social concern. Now, this is one of the things that's interesting. In the 1800s, when India has been halfway colonized by India, and there's a movement starts up. And the movement is India for Indians, for Hindus. We don't like these Muslims, we don't like these Christians, we don't want Buddhists, we don't want anything that's non-Indian. So How do you get a religion that looks like Hinduism with zillions of different gods and every village not caring what the next village next door does? How do you get them all to agree? And scholars basically say what comes out of this mindset is what's called syndicated Hinduism, or a simplified kind of lowest common denominator. What is it we all as Hindus agree? We have our zillions of gods, but what do we all agree on? Well, the world's an illusion. We're stuck on it. Karma and reincarnation are true, and behind it all is God. Okay, simple enough. And that's what comes out. So the attempt is in the 1800s, mid-1800s especially, is this nationalist movement. And originally they called it Ara Samaj, and there's several other versions of it. And they're nationalists, but they're both nationalist and Hindu. England's influence must be removed because it's not Hindu. Now, in light of that whole thing comes a social reform movement. And you have all sorts of Advaita Vedanta teachers coming out, and Gandhi being the best known. We should be concerned about the masses. Now, this is going to cause quite a fuss. Because, as I just read you, Gandhi himself says it's the Gita that gives me hope for life and meaning and all this kind of stuff. But as you look at the message of the Gita, you have a hard time seeing social reform. In fact, traditionally, social reform has been the exact opposite of Vedic concerns. Why? Well, if the world's an illusion, there's no poor that are suffering, no people that are being oppressed. English colonialism, fairy tale, myth, Maya, doesn't actually exist. Should I be upset about it? Well, if you read Krishna's version of what he told Arjuna, no, don't get upset about anything. None of this you're experiencing is real. The ancient Hindus had a word for this called lila. It means the dance. It's not just that we're in illusion, but lila is a little stronger language. It's very fatalistic. Whatever happens, it's just karmic, and just get into it. Party while you get slaughtered. Well, anyways, the reformers come along and say, no, the Vedas teach us we ought to be concerned about the poor or the oppressed or something like this. Which, if you're a Hindu, scholar, you come along, it's kind of equivalent of the Christian coming along and saying, well, I think we ought to slaughter everybody in sight. And the traditional Christian Orthodox staff, what the heck are you talking about? Where does the Bible say that? Well, this is one of those funny things. It doesn't matter that the tradition doesn't teach it, the text doesn't say it. What matters is that something else has gone on in India. And this is where the national framework of what's happened in the country is so critical. England has been colonized by the British. And the British missionaries are coming over. Many of you know some of the stories of more famous missionaries that went over to India. And in the midst of that, along comes the Christian message, personal God. Well, a Hindu can accept that, certainly. But there is other things going on. We should care for the masses. You might remember the story 7 or 8 years ago now. An Australian missionary and his sons were burned alive in a truck. They were literally herded into the truck and burned alive. Why? What was his great sin? Well, he was working and had been running a leper hospital for the untouchables, for the lowest caste. And people were actually responding to the fact that people were loving them and taking care of them, and they were leaving the Hindu worldview, as it were, and becoming Christians. So it was a group of Hindu nationalists that did this, just like it was a group of Hindu nationalists that killed Gandhi. Why? Well, Andrew Fort's probably one of the top scholars on Hinduism in the world. And one of the things that Andrew Fort points out about all of these different guys, every one of the reformers, is that they all went to British colonial schools. Every one of them, including Gandhi himself. And so you start thinking, all right, what's going on here? Well, much like the rebirth of personal gods comes along perhaps with the introduction of Christ back into India, at least an interest in personal gods, isn't it rather ironic that when they run into, whatever you think of British colonialism, when you run into this Judeo-Christian culture, which is going to have at least part of it as a social justice outlook, we ought to take care of the poor, whatever, again, I'm not a big fan of English goals, but at least part of the element is in there that we ought to take care of those who are disadvantaged. We ought to take care of the poor. And a lot of the things like the practice of sati, widow burning and stuff like that, the English were outlawing. You can't do this to people. You can't treat people this way, blah, 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 at least in the territories they had control over. So all of these guys go to English schools, and they all get affected by this. And I can imagine, because it's just the way people act, that when they're having discussions about the virtues of their religion, whether with their classmates who might be English kids of soldiers that are stationed there or teachers, and they're trying to defend their Hindu faith, it comes off poor by comparison to say that we're not supposed to care what happens to anybody. Because as, again, Ravi Zacharias has a great way of illustrating this, even the Hindu looks both ways when he crosses the street. You can say the world's Maya all you want, but you don't actually live there. So the Hindu, because he has a conscience made in God's image just like anybody else, when a Hindu sees people being oppressed, he reacts, just like anybody else does. When a Hindu's child dies, they react, just like anybody else does. Hindus have cops. I've had that question come to me many times. Well, do they have police if they believe this stuff? I said, of course they do. They go, why? I said, well, because they sort of believe this stuff, but you can't possibly live this stuff. So here comes this group of reformers in the last 150 years out of the Vedic tradition now claiming to be concerned about the masses. Vivekananda comes over here in 1893 at the first Parliament of World Religions. He is adored by the liberal masses on the West Coast, the Unitarians and all sorts of former Christians on the Eastern side. Think this guy walks on water. He had a vision of Kali, where Kali, and if you know anything about Kali, Kali is the baddest of all women that's ever been. She is the nastiest god in India, goddess. He had a vision of Kali who instructed him that all religions are one. Well, the pluralistic mindset's really setting in on the East Coast in the early 1900s, late 1800s, the birth of Christian Science and religious science and mind science and anthropomorphical society and all these different groups. He comes over there right at the height of all that, and they just adore the ground he walks on. I've read some of his letters that he wrote and people that wrote him letters, and he's just, a lot of my paper deals with Vivekananda, but he's just revered. And he goes back and forth. He sees himself as a crusader, bringing the joys of Advaita Vedanta to a new world. He's the first Christian Hindu missionary in this sense. But he also is bugged by his own personal doubts, so he's kind of a funny guy. He's God on earth to the people he's walking with, but in a lot of letters he writes, I'm really disappointed. Nothing's working out like I wanted it to. It's kind of funny how human he is. Well, when I went to the Parliament of Religions in 1993, 100 years later, in Chicago, it was the first time they did it, and then Don Vino and a few of us were there, and at the Palmer House Hotel, 8,000 religious and academic figures, political figures. The Dalai Lama was there. Every religion under the sun except for the JWs. Cults I'd not even seen in the country, like the Children of God made an appearance. Sikhs, Jains, you name it, they're all there from all over the world. Zoroastrians. I read about these people, but it was an amazing thing. Amazing time to be able to witness people. Well, the hero of the day was Vivekananda. And Diane Eck from Harvard, very famous world religious scholars, there's praising, since Vivekananda came here in 1893, we now have thousands of Hindu temples and even more Buddhist temples, and now we have mosques, and isn't it wonderful? We're all getting this vision of the oneness of all religions and all this kind of stuff. And again, you can read her addresses online and see what Diane Eck said. But Vivekananda was seen as the great one who brought us this wonderful truth, that if we really get down below it, Christian, whatever, it's all one. So what Vivekananda introduces was already here. Some of the other quotes, the Transcendentalists, Thoreau, Walden, all sorts of Ralph Emerson, they're all reading the Bhagavad Gita. The Europeans are reading the Bhagavad Gita. Nietzsche, who I'm talking about tomorrow, is reading it in high school when he's in the 1840s in Germany. India's, all these books are going back to Europe, and it's a question of who changed who more, I guess, at this point. But Vivekananda kind of becomes the man for introducing it. So all these gurus that come over in the 60s, same ideas, all right? Different ways of saying it. Again, Maharishi Yogi is different from Maharaji, but only in expression. Okay, at the bottom line, they're both Advaita Vedantas. The goal is for you to understand there's only one, and you're actually that one. You just haven't seen it yet. All right, so when we come into the question of social reform, if you understand the Vedas traditionally, then you have no social concern. But now they all point to Gandhi. Oh, see, Gandhi. And my argument is, to take Francis Schaeffer's line, this is borrowed capital. The Vedic tradition does not give you a basis for social reform. In fact, it's at the antithesis. It attacks social concern, just like historic Buddhism does. But Buddhism has the same effect in the country. Hinduism gets morphed in the country into a social movement, and Buddhism comes over here full of compassion. But that's not what the Buddha actually said. But from a Judeo-Christian audience, at least sort of Judeo-Christian, it has to morph and change. So now, when Americans talk about Hinduism, Buddhism, these are compassionate, wonderful teachers who only are concerned about the masses. If you listen to a guru like our friend in Oregon, Rajneesh, he had a great way of saying this. Rajneesh was an enlightened master. And both he planned to play the Buddhist and the Hindu game. So He had the role of bodhisattva, which in Buddhism is an enlightened one who could go on, but because of his compassion for the masses decides to stay and help all us morons. But he's also a guru, a teacher in an Advaita tradition, with the idea being that he is here to free us from our attachment to the Mayan trap. And so Rajneesh was going and getting all these stockbrokers and rich people coming up to Oregon and saying, you know, what's happened is you guys are stuck in your attachment to the world. And you've got your Rolexes, you've got your Lexus, you've got your stocks and bonds, you've got your big house out in the Catskills, and you're miserable as could be. You run the rat race, the rats have won. So I'm here to help you out. I'm going to teach you the glories of Advaita Vedanta, but I'm going to help you even more directly than that. I want you to give me your house and your stocks and bonds and your watches and your cars and everything. Oh, I know some of you might be concerned that I might become detached. Oh, please, folks, I'm way past that. I'm so detached. I'm just here to help you. So, of course, by the time he was done, he had, 92 Rolls Royces before he finally got booted out of the country. But he wasn't attached to it any, of course. This is the classic guru message. Is that you're detached and let me help you out. Give me your children, give me your wife, whatever it takes. So we have time for a little bit of questions here. No, we don't. Well, we sort of do. We have a minute or two. When's the next session start? Oh, we have lots of time. I can make this much more detailed.
The way his
Who?
Rajneesh.
Rajneesh.
The way he liked to explain it was in his way when he lived in the big house and ate best food and drove around his work, he was actually poking fun at the materialism of the people. So he wasn't infected by it, but he was actually poking fun at it by doing all the things that his rich followers.
Right, and if you might object that he has all these things, or that he has sexual relations, this is one of the issues with many of the gurus, and even with my Hindu professor, who's a practicing Pure Land Buddhist, but has her PhD in Hinduism, we talked about this several times about the God-men having feet of clay, and she would always acknowledge that these enlightened ones, these gurus, these masters, are so routinely caught doing grotesquely bad things to their followers. Well, what's the issue then? What's the rational defense? You guys tell me. Nothing actually happened. Right. You just think it happened. Therein is you bought into the trap again. So the fact that you're reacting to this the fact that you're reacting to the fact that you were raped just shows how unenlightened you actually are. And so if I rape you, I'm actually teaching you. And you get some really perverse, in fact, I have a friend that I grew up with, and I only found this out several years ago, that actually joined Dr. John, which is one of the really nasty New Age groups out of this country, totally into this. And his way of teaching his disciples would be to perversely sexually mistreat them, rape them and such, because that helps them get past their attachment to the fact that they've been violated. I have to violate you repeatedly so you'll finally get over this violation thing and realize none of it's actually true. So in the end, you justify all things. Yes, ma'am?
What about, I'm trying to...
You're trying to make sense out of this?
A couple of Hindus who worked for us. I'm in technology, and so there's lots of Hindus.
Sure.
But the marriage, they match people up on all these different dimensions. If everything is not real and there's a different...
The Gita eHarmony is what you're saying?
Yeah.
eHarmony.Bhagavad Gita. The 8 billion, dimensions. Understand, you cannot live out this whole thing, and they know it too. But that's why you're trapped. In Hindu social structure, there's another type of caste. There's actually another version of the caste. It's a minority view. And then there's a social structure. And you see how the Buddha did this. But Shankar, about the time you're 3 or 4, you start learning Sanskrit. You're a student. And you get to be 18 or 19, and then you're married, and you become what's called a householder. Now, the householder responsibility is to take care of a family, raise a family. And then when you get to your late 40s and 50s, you're allowed to abandon your household because your children essentially are raised. And then you become usually an ascetic, a wanderer. You try to minimize your karmic involvement with the world because karma is what brings you off the wheel. So now, at the end of fulfilling my social duties, I must somehow minimize my karma. The Jains take this to the nth degree. By the end of the life, you starve yourself to death. You eat nothing, you drink nothing, because that's all karma too. But anyways, in India, there's that tradition. One of the things that made the Buddha popular is he came in the middle and says, you don't have to go through this whole thing. You don't have to raise your wife and kids. You can get out now. So I can abandon my wife and kids and do what I want? Cool. I'm out of this prison. That's what Buddhism saw. And all of a sudden you have a gigantic social problem of thousands of women who have been abandoned with their children and no one to take care of them because the men have abandoned their householder roles. So in the sense of something like this, there is a long-standing tradition of the social. It's like if anybody let's take the Jains, where you don't eat or drink. If they applied consistency, there would have been one generation of Jains, and that would be the end of the whole thing. So they don't. So you live for a period of time as if the world's real. You get married, you're concerned. On the marriage one, it's really interesting. If you read the Rig Veda, all the way down to, say, the Bhagavad Gita, and by the way, there are hundreds of other Hindu texts. All right, you say, what is the Bible for? Well, the Gita is the closest thing we have to something they all like. But early in the Vedas, to late in the Vedas, to the Upanishads, of which that's just part of, one of the consistent themes, if an upper caste man sleeps with a lower caste woman, it's okay, no problem. But if a lower caste man tries to sleep with an upper class woman, oh, he will come back as a frog for 1,000,000 lifetimes and stuff like. I mean, the language is just amazingly harsh towards any mixing around in the wrong direction. So again, it's nice, how convenient for the upper caste man to justify they can do anything. Lower caste man, you're going to have to wait your turn before you can have sex with anybody you want. So there are social things built into the system, but they don't make sense. Now, that's ironic, of course, because if you look at the horn around where India really had its influence on the coastal cities and somewhat that's where all these schools of technology comes from. So you go to those cities and you'll see a lot of Western life, but you can go back in parts of the country and it's like stepping back 2,000 years inside of a day's drive, because they had no influence with either the Muslims or especially the English, so they don't have that influence. But yeah, there'll be social norms that are very, very tightly constricted, and that marriage is usually arranged long before those children are ever old enough to even know each other. But they have to be in the same caste, and they have to. Hopefully, there's a dowry to be paid, and the practice of sati comes from the dowry. Why do you burn the widow? Because if the husband dies young, and women are devalued at every step of this whole thing, women have to become men before they can go up the chain. So, and it's true in Buddhism as well. Women are always devalued inside the caste. So if your daughter, say you're up here, and your daughter marries some man in your caste, and then he dies shortly after, for whatever reason, the practice of throwing the bride onto the funeral pyre was seen as a benefit to both families. The man's family did not want to return the dowry, and the female family did not want another girl back because that's just another useless eater. And the idea being is that we throw her on the fire, she'll hopefully come back as a man, and so we're actually doing her a favor, which is why girl babies are killed in India to this very day. They're not helping. And the government has enacted laws which allow you 3 weeks to kill your baby if it's a girl and you don't want it. And you can do that, but if that lasts more than 3 weeks, then the number I'm picking out of a hat here, but it's something like that. If the baby survives 3 weeks, then you have to let her live. I have a story from a World Vision missionary who's been over there for quite a while and talked about the fact that one of the things they've done in their area is that they have paid the dowry price, because what happens is the poor family has a girl and they say, oh, shoot, we're going to have to pay a dowry in 18 years or so, and we can't do it. So in order to save her, they pay the dowry price. Anybody want to get a guess what that amounts to? What it takes to save a little girl's life?
$1,000.
$40. $40 in their economy is a lot of money in the poorer parts of India. And this is what they do, is they bank $40 for the girl's family, so she'll have a dowry to give, so they'll let her live. I mean, but it's, again, tied into this. So there are social norms inside of it, but they don't make sense in light of the larger picture, and they themselves say it. But again, here's Shankara running away from the tiger. Here's Shankara giving an offering to Vishnu. If you want consistency, forget it. You can't. Hindus feed their children cereal, not cyanide, even though there's no difference. But they can't live on the basis of that. And so my approach to talking to people like this, I do this with New Agers, but I especially do it with Hindu nationals, because they're first question out of my mouth, if I find out they're from India. Oh, what do you think of the Gita? Oh my gosh, I love the Gita. It's the most important book in my family, blah, blah, blah. And then I'll say, oh, I'm so glad you appreciate the Gita. Let me ask you something. Do you think it's okay to kill somebody? And the huge eyes. What are you talking about? I would never hurt anybody. I believe they're telling the truth. Because this is the conscience that God gave them. As Romans 2 tells us, the Gentiles have the law even though they don't have it in stone. So I say, I really appreciate it. You wouldn't kill anybody, but I'm interested. You told me you love the Gita, and then you told me that you wouldn't kill anybody. But if I understand chapter 2 of what Krishna teaches Arjuna, it's okay to kill people because they don't actually exist. So is it okay for you to kill? Your guru says it is. Or is it wrong for you to kill? Now what I've done is I put his conscience against his teacher. And I'm going to bet that the conscience wins out. And trust that the Holy Spirit is attacking that false thought that's invading the conscience. You even think about Romans 1 where they have to suppress the truth and unrighteousness to turn to this. I'm thinking that's a huge part of it. That the real social concern they have, whether it's Gandhi or Ramonda Roy or all these different guys, is based on the conscience that God gave them. It's wrong to do these things to people. And so, in buying this, you undermine the social conscience. By rejecting this, you can make sense out of their own innate desire to know that it's wrong to kill people, it's wrong to rape, it's wrong to steal. So I'm always trying to make them wrestle with their guru on this question of good and evil. And the good thing is, their own text gave me that. I don't care what the Bible says any more than New Age, for instance, but they do have a conscience. New Agers are always activated by the world. We've got to save this, the whales, we've got to do something, but the world's an illusion, guys.
No, it's the same. If you get off the wheel, if you're lucky enough to get off the wheel, what's the most you hope for? Just to become one again with the ocean?
Yeah, but you're cheating, Mark, because you kept saying this word, you.
Oh.
You're not enlightened enough to get this shit, Mark.
Oh, sorry.
The understanding is that what you think to be you has to understand that it will cease to exist, though it never did, once it rejoins the ocean.
Staying on the wheel. At least
No. The world's a punishment. The fact that I'm here means I'm going to suffer more because I have to pay off past karma. So I want to get off the wheel to a place where I don't suffer. And Buddhism takes this again much farther in the whole suffering theme, but it's certainly present in ancient Hinduism. The world's a bad place. Get me out of here, Scotty. And so the track is what's the best path or marga? Is it through yoga? Is it through bhakti? Is it through knowledge? And so the Advaita Vedanta, the guru path, is knowledge. Just understanding the true picture of the universe. Understanding the Gita properly gets you off the wheel and you don't have to come back. Yay, that's the goal.
We were in India, we were in Bombay, and some lady went into some type of seizure, and we had medical people with us that tried to help her. And we were told if we helped her, we'd be dead. It was her karma, it needed to happen. The husband was pushing us away because he wanted her to die.
Yeah, well, not only is she a woman,
she did.
but consistent, and you can rationalize this 3 or 4 different ways, Paul. That's perfectly consistent with what they ultimately believe. Which is why, as much as I'm not a fan of Mother Teresa, she's hated by the gurus when she was alive there. Because alleviating people's suffering, is not a good thing.
Right.
They must suffer because it's their karmic duty. If they don't suffer now, you're just making them come back and do it again.
Right.
So that's why that's why there's lepers. Parents, especially if you're lower caste and you're begging in Calcutta or something like this, parents will routinely put kids' eyes out, break their limbs and cripple them when they're very young. Why? Because there's no hope of it. What every American thinks, you can be born in a log cabin and become president, that kind of optimism is so present because of our Christian values. The Hindu says there's no hope of climbing the ladder in this life. There's only the hope of doing well in this life and then coming up in your next life. So to alleviate suffering is not seen as the good thing. But you saw it personally.
That was pretty hard. It was hardcore. I mean, it was leaving that scene was just it's like no hope. I mean, you go to some of the temples out there in India. It's just you feel the demons hanging around there. Just dead people. I mean, they're already dead. They're just walking around in the temple of the dead and just crazy stuff, man.
Yeah. Well, now you have a picture of why.
Yep.
Okay, it's 11 o'clock is the time, so thank you for being here.